Hi everyone, we're at 2 o'clock. Sorry we're getting started just a few minutes late. We're going to give folks another minute or two to get on, and then we'll get started. Hi everyone. Again, we're just going to give everyone another minute or two to get dialed in. So if you're not hearing anything, do not fear. It's only because we haven't begun the webinar yet. So we'll give folks maybe one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, well, it's a few minutes after the hour. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We see a lot of people dialing in and saying hello, so welcome and thank you to everyone. We are extremely excited to be holding this webinar today and to be joined by Dr. Tick. Before we get started, I'm just going to give a quick overview and go through a bit of technical housekeeping before I virtually hand it over to Dr. Tick. Okay, so first things first, we just want to make sure everyone knows how to use Zoom. On your screen, if you hover at the bottom, you will see a few different options. You'll see chat, which I see many of you are already familiar with. You can send messages to all of the panelists or privately to any of us. You can also raise your hand, but the most important one to the right is the Q&A. So my trusty We Honor Veterans colleague, Hope Fost, is here with us. Hi, everybody. And we will be monitoring the Q&A section throughout the webinar. So if you have any technical questions, feel free to send them on. Dr. Tick has also graciously offered to really include you all in this discussion. So throughout the webinar today, I'm going to be sending him your questions and he will answer them as we go along. Also at the end, his lecture will take about an hour. The last half an hour is going to be spent just with Q&A and also with an open discussion. Again, he really wants us to have a back and forth and get some audience involvement. So there will be many of options to ask questions and also share your thoughts at the end. So if you do have a question, use that Q&A box, send it along, and again, we will be monitoring those throughout. And then at the end of the webinar, if you would like to share or speak up, We have the ability to unmute you, so we'll go ahead and just pick some audience members at random to participate. Okay, so without further ado, I would love, again, we are very, very happy to be joined by Dr. Edward Tick today. So he is the director of the organization Soldier's Heart. So he has been honored for his groundbreaking work in the spiritual, holistic, as well as the community-based healing of veterans, particularly with post-traumatic stress disorder. He's been a psychotherapist for 40 years, and he's authored many books. He has specialized in working with veterans since the 70s, and was actually the social work supervisor and veteran specialist with Community Hospice of the Capital District for a decade. So again, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Tick here, as he has actually worked with hospice quite a bit, both in his region around New York, as well as other parts of the country. So back in the beginning, when hospice was learning about the special care with veterans, he really worked hard to help introduce the unique needs to the hospice community, and really wanted to reinforce today the unity of service that we are all giving here. So again, thank you, Dr. Tick, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
No, thank you very much, Catherine, and you are most welcome, you and Hope and the entire National Hospice Organization and our veteran partners. So, hello everyone out there. Welcome to all of you, my friends and colleagues, brothers and sisters in this work. I'm honored to be with you today, and I again thank Catherine and Hope and National Hospice for sponsoring this webinar, but much more importantly, in the large scope of things, for entering into partnership with the Veterans Administration and for realizing and working together to create integrated and community-based and holistic healing and tending for our military veterans and families, because that's utterly what they need and what other cultures and traditional societies give their warriors. And we'll be talking about that much today. Veterans need to be included in their communities and in their society, before, during, and after service, and of course for the entire life cycle, and through the terminal process and through the death and dying experience. So the more we can include the community, the more we take a holistic approach, the better we will do for our veterans and for all of us. And we'll actually be contributing to healing our society as well, because there's a terrible veteran-civilian divide that we need to heal, to help all of our veterans, whether they're just returned from war or in our terminal process. So we'll get to all of these matters as we go. But I welcome all of you. I see we have we have 650 participants from all over the United States and from Canada. So again, welcome to all of you, and let us all realize that we are in this together. And really in a significant social movement in trying to understand, bring proper healing to our veterans, and apply these lessons to the well-being of all of society. So with those introductory remarks, Catherine has already shared with you that I've been working with our military and veterans for over 40 years now, since the end of the Vietnam War. And I began working with our veterans before PTSD was even established as a modern diagnosis, which happened in 1980. This means for me and for all of us, of course, that, as Catherine said, our military and veterans are a unique population. They do have their own unique needs, experiences, community, psychology, spirituality, and we need to understand all of those as deeply as possible in order to serve them accurately and well. Our service models and practices have to fit who they are in their minds, hearts, and souls. And all of our vets have become warriors. And warriors have a different relationship to death and dying than the rest of us. And that's what we will be concentrating on today. We understand our warriors' relations to death and dying from their military experiences, and ever since, we can create a much more meaningful and sensitive end time for them. So let's jump right in. And you are invited, as Catherine said, to send in comments and questions as I speak. I'll try to get to them, but I'll also save time at the end for all of us to be in discussion together. So we begin with this first slide. Many of you do this, and I always begin with a prayer when I'm working with our warriors for a number of reasons. There are many, many poems and prayers in the worldwide warrior traditions that you can use. I choose the prayers and the poems especially for the veterans I'm working with and for the meaning that we want to explore in that meeting. So here you see for our invocation today, I chose a brief prayer from Sitting Bull. And he wrote many prayers and songs during his time with us on the planet. And he did write a death song as well, which we'll share at the end. This song he wrote and sang to his people when he was being initiated as head chief of all the Lakota people. And I'll tell you why. I'll say it as an invocation for our program today and then share why I chose it. So Sitting Bull sang to his people, "You tribes behold me, the chiefs of old are gone. Myself I shall take courage. You tribes behold me, the chiefs of old are gone. Myself I shall take courage." Now there's many meanings at different levels for this, but regarding our concern with our veterans, our warriors in the terminal phase of life, let's think about it. You tribes behold me means that warriors need to be seen by their tribes and tended in community. That's while they're serving, when they return, and very much at the end of life process. So do everything you can to find ways to restore the community surrounding your veteran, even during the terminal process, even in the last few days. Bring people from the community in, family members, friends, other vets, of course, and other caring citizens who want to be part of it. Veterans did not die in isolation. They need to be beheld and honored by the community. The chiefs of old are gone. And Sitting Bull believed, the Native Americans believe, and many traditional cultures believe that our souls survive in the spirit world and they move on and we become spiritual elders. Whether we believe that or not, literally, the fact that warriors are seeking to become elders and ancestors, and traditional cultures taught this. You're not only here now for us, but by your role model, by your good work in our community, by your spiritual practices, you can become an ancestor. And you'll be remembered, and people can pray to you for help. Now, literally, if they experience you here, you might come to them in dreams and visions. Or figuratively, if we don't believe that, you're still in their minds, and we can evoke you as an ancestor to guide people through the life cycle and through the dying process. So I always talk about the ancestors, the spiritual warriors of the past. And I also talk about and share those spiritual ancestors who may have been afflicted with the invisible wounds, PTSD and moral injury. And in fact, when we look at the history of warfare, it turns out that many of the greatest warriors we've ever heard about and studied have the wound that today we call PTSD. So I refer to them. King David and King Saul both had what we would call PTSD. Of course, General Patton had it. We know he's famous for beating up and insulting his soldiers and saying they should be shot if they're too frightened. St. Francis had it. George Washington had it, if we carefully read the biographies and see the struggles he had to carry his war memories for the rest of his life. So our veterans in the terminal process are working to become warrior ancestors, the chiefs of old. And one goal in life that can be very positive is what kind of role model are you leaving behind? How are your loved ones in your community going to think about you when you're gone? And will your role model remain for us as one of our warrior ancestors to whom we can appeal, counsel, remember, to give ourselves strength and courage as we go through the life cycle. And finally, we see Sitting Bull says, myself, I shall take courage. Every time he or any warrior goes out to battle, they know that they are potentially meeting their death, and they have to have courage. To die well takes courage. My father was a World War II era veteran. He died last June. And one of the very last things he said to me when my wife Kate and I arrived to keep the death watch at his bedside, one of the last things he said was, if I must die, then I must die. Let's do it. And he went even into the dying process in his final days with acceptance and courage and affirmation. So we can look for that in our veterans. We want to help them be remembered as ancestors of honor, as chiefs of old. Okay. Okay, so we've already begun covering this, but I want to briefly share, whoops. My controls are not working correctly. I apologize. No. Okay, I'm back. Briefly share our program. We're not only talking about how to help our, we're stopping for a moment, and Catherine and Hope are going to take a quick poll to get more information about who's here. Sorry, gang, I missed my cue. Okay.
All right, Dr. Tick, looks like we're kind of slowing down on the poll, so I'll go ahead and end it here.
Okay.
See where we're at.
So shall I just continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, we did get some poll results, and so you do hear that we're calling from all over the country in Canada, and we are all well represented from everywhere. So thank you all for being part of this shared mission. Okay, so we're going to move on with our presentation. Okay, so we're going to work on covering these topics today: warriors and the death imprint, not just how we can tend them in our hospice work, but more in the larger context, from the greatest perspective. Warriors are involved in taking life. That is the reason that they exist, and they serve us. We'll talk about that. So they are exposed to death and what has been called a death imprint or death immersion from the moment they became warriors. And so we'll discuss that. And we will discuss warriors, death and dying in both traditional cultures and among modern warriors today, and then also look at principles and practices for aging warriors to help them deal with that death immersion that they have experienced, and also face their own death, of course. Okay, so here you see on the slide in front of us, this is an ancient Greek piece of pottery that depicts a warrior's funeral. So a few things we want to notice about this and learn from it. One is we can see from this piece of artwork and artwork from all over the world, really, and throughout time, that warriors and their presence in the society have been recognized, honored, portrayed in public ways, and the entire community or nation has been involved in their care at the end. And we see that happening here. So what we see that the community is involved in a ritual to help the warrior cope with his passing. We see that there's a priest in the white robe. We see that there's the spouse or priestess on the left. We see that community members, both men and women, have gathered around. We see the warrior's shield hanging over his head. We see some sacred items on the altar underneath his bed. And we see some sacred writings indicating who these people were and what they were praying, how they were practicing the ritual for the end. All of these components, clergy, spouse, community, other warriors, artifacts from the military service are of critical importance, and all of those can be called into service and can surround the warriors. Now, let me share a hospice story very briefly. When I was a hospice senior social worker and we were creating a veteran programming here in the Capital District of New York, one of my social workers couldn't get through to one of her patients who was really angry, ornery, used to chase hospice and everybody out of his living room. She didn't know how to help him and wondered if I would make the home visit with her. And of course I would. Well, I went into this little country house. The hospital bed had been moved into the living room, and all over the room were model airplanes from World War II era. American planes, British planes, German, Japanese. I just walked into the room and looked around and I said, oh my God, brother, tell me about what the air war in World War II was like. I see you were in it. And he slapped his knee. He broke into a beautiful smile and he said, well, darn it, I've just been waiting for somebody to ask me that question for months now. So he talked to me. He welcomed hospice from then on. All he needed was recognition that he was a veteran and that he was trying to tell in his symbolic way by having these toys and artifacts around that helped him remember his service. So sometimes veterans will do this spontaneously, sometimes not, but certainly ask, do you have any relics? Does your family have relics? Did you keep souvenirs? Did you keep medals or badges or pins, and where are they? And can we bring them out now during this final time together? So use this model that the ancients are showing us for the full time of passing that our warriors today need. Okay, so we're all in hospice and we're all doing this work today, and most of you probably know this, but it behooves us repeating it. We know that World War II and Korean War veterans are in care now. They are dying off quickly, and their numbers are very rapidly declining. I hope we all also know that Vietnam veterans are aging and dying off earlier. I'm 67, and I'm quite healthy for my age. I'm blessed for that. And many members of the Vietnam generation are aging well. However, Vietnam veterans are not. There were about 2.5 million American men and 5,000 women in combat, in the combat zone during the war. There's less than 1 million alive. So they are dying off much faster than the rest of the generation, and they are also falling into our social ills and challenges, such as homelessness, needing assisted living, having multiple medical and psychological challenges as they age. So we need to be aware of them and especially sensitive to them, and the fact that they're dying younger and life really was taken away from them in Vietnam, even if they lived through the war. And it's the same is true of where veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. Some are dying very young from radiation poisoning or from other of the afflictions of modern toxic war zones. And as we all know, the suicide rate is very high among them, also accidents and other matters. So be very aware that we will be getting young veterans in, and they will need also more special care and special attention. And also, we don't talk about this enough, but we have many unknown and secret wars. We have many lifers. You will get veterans from the wars hardly anybody remembers, and they will have special issues. Does anybody remember Grenada or El Salvador or Haiti or Lebanon? We have those veterans. They will show up, but they will also feel less part of the veteran community and less part of American history because we don't know enough about them and give them enough attention. So watch out for them, learn what you can about their service and there's the special issues, and make sure we include them as well. Presently, we have troops fighting in about 40 countries around the world now, and troops stationed in about 150 countries. So don't assume that it's just the major combat zones that most of us know about. Investigate all of them and all of veteran experience from everywhere. Okay, so we want to look more closely at veterans and their relationship to death. And we have to ask the question, what is a warrior? Our military and veterans become warriors in the American version of the archetype. I hope we're all comfortable with the word archetype. It means a universal image, pattern, set of stories and experiences that recur again and again throughout human history. So we see an ancient Greek warrior here. Well, the Minuteman in the American history and a special forces warrior heavily armed with technological weaponry today, they're both versions of the warrior archetype emerging from American culture. So we need to ask, what is a warrior? How have you manifested the archetype? And we need to learn as much as we can about the spirituality of warriorhood, and especially as it concerns us, their relationship to death and dying. Okay, so while there is a huge, the slides have a life of their own. Sorry, folks, I'm not changing the slides. I don't know what's happening. Stay with me, please. The slides are flipping through on their own. Wow. Okay, this is where we were. Mr. Death is what some of our veterans have called the presence of death, and they've said that it's so strong that it is like death is a character and is pursuing them. So you can ask, and you should investigate if they're conscious and willing. Have you met Mr. Death in the past? How long has he been with you? Do you feel like you've been pursued by death? What is your relationship to death since out in the combat zone, as the veterans say, we will walk quite friendly up to death? Death is a presence to warriors, even if they weren't in combat or in the combat zone, in a way that it's not to civilians, because their job, as Gunny, you see, said, my job was to meet on the battlefield and either kill or be killed. And others, the medics said, I've touched more dead bodies in a single year of service than living people in my entire life. So warriors have been heavily exposed to death, and they will bring that exposure into hospice and into the terminal relationship. This has been called the Death Imprint by Robert J. Lifton. I hope some of you know his work. He's in his 90s now. He's our seminal psychohistorian who has been studying the impact of war in extreme conditions, bringing massive death for his entire career. So he called it the death imprint, an indelible death imprint that anyone who has survived war or massive violence experiences. And it always comes with anxiety, guilt, psychic numbing, and suspicion of the counterfeit. We say that veterans have very, very strong BS meters, and it's true. They really want to know that we're really with them, we really care, and the nurturing we're giving is affecting us also. We're not just doing a job, but we're deep in it with them. And the death imprint also blows apart our ability to construct order, to have a sane, continuous narrative of our lives, and also to create meaning. And so we also need to pay attention to that. What order and meaning can we provide at the end from somebody who's about to leave us? And have they retained order and meaning in their life, or can they restore it? Or, of course, in the final days, are they even capable of doing some of this work? We have to evaluate that. But let's go to the top. You see a translation of the word warrior from the Flathead people who live up in Montana. To them, a warrior means one who is tasked to kill or to take blood to protect the tribe. So inevitably and inherently, when we're working with warriors, even if they only had a desk job in the military, they learned how to kill. They were part of our huge military apparatus that practices death and destruction for our protection. And they have been extremely exposed to the death imprint, and they carry it. And so you see the quote from the 90-year-old concentration camp liberator. He looked like he was okay all the way through life, but I was working with this couple during his terminal process, and finally, only on his deathbed did he say this to his wife: "You have no idea how much I struggled day after day just to go on living." So we can ask that too. How much has death been with you? How did your time in the military and in the combat zone, how did that spice your taste for life, for better, for worse, good taste, bad taste? Have you been carrying grief your whole life and your struggle is almost over? How can we love and support you the best at this end time? Jumping in. Okay, so when we look at the warrior traditions of the world, we can see that this special attitude that warriors have toward death have been with us for as long as warriors have. The very first quote I offer you is from the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is the very first book we have. It's over 4,000 years old. The very first book humanity has is a warrior epic, and much of it deals with the Gilgamesh, the warrior hero's attitude toward death and the loss of his battle buddy, his best friend. He said, "A man sees death in things. After being through the combat experience, inevitably we have learned to see death in things." And we see from all of these quotes, from ancient Greece, from the Iliad, meet destruction or come through, to kill or be killed. Dying in battle is horrible, and Shakespeare witnessed to that as well. We've inherited, and we are finally paying attention to what we call moral injury today. That's a new term for us, just like PTSD is only 30 years old for us, 40 years old. But moral injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, as inevitable wounds from military service and war, go back to the beginning of time, the beginning of warfare. And so we hear Black Elk. I hope some of you have read Black Elk Speaks. We hear Black Elk telling us that we know that going on the warpath is wrong and bad and will cause pain, even if it's necessary. And we all develop a sense of shame before the divine for what we've done. So Black Elk is also teaching us not that only some people will be morally injured, as we tend to interpret today, but that going to war, being trained to life, and taking life itself causes moral injury. So we need to be aware of that and also investigate whether something needs to be, can we respond to moral injury? Can it be possible for us to respond to moral injury and the death imprint in the remaining elements of life? And again, a few of our attendees are writing in saying how important it is to understand the death imprint, that it has been there, and that we need to address it at the end of life. And I will share some of the ways that we can do that, and traditional cultures did it. And finally, you see the Buddhist teaching. Even if it's a righteous cause, every warrior must be prepared to be slain. That's the destiny of warriors. So again, the death imprint is present. Many of our vets in hospice will say things like, I died a long time ago. I've just been waiting for Mr. Death to catch up to me. Or I died during the war. All of this has been borrowed time. And now it's finally my time to meet my proper end. So there are many concerns about this, many ways that we address the death imprint. But realizing it's there, it's finally catching up. And in a way, the warrior meeting his death through hospice is as if life is finally bringing us up to date with what we expected to happen years, maybe many decades before. And we're moving on not only ancient attitudes toward death, but also to show how the death imprint impacts our modern warriors as well. And again, it's inevitable. So the first quote we have is from Brian Turner, who is an Iraq veteran and a poet. This is from his book, Here, Bullet, which I highly recommend. And one of his poems goes on and on and on about all the reasons that we kill. And he finally, at the end, says, no matter what, it should break your heart to kill. Here too, many of our warriors, inevitably, all of us will go numb. And we know that in PTSD, psychic numbness, going numb, not being able to feel anything but anger is one of the worst symptoms. Now, anger often returns during the terminal process, especially if somebody is losing their mental facilities and they don't know if it's past or present. Old memories and emotions return, and there can be a lot of anger, and it can be a mixture of one's own anger and also the dementia process. And so we also have to listen really carefully and see if we can differentiate. Is this person conscious of what he or she is angry at? Is this anger left from the military in combat? Are they still angry at officers that wronged them or enemies who tried to kill them? And are they experiencing that? And sometimes we can do really, if they're conscious enough, if it's not just the dementia process, we can do good imaginal work to reconcile those feelings at the end while they're returning to us. Now, these quotes indicate that moral injury is inevitable. Probably many of you know M. Scott Peck and his famous book, The Road Not Taken. He also wrote People of the Lie. Scott Peck was Surgeon General during the Vietnam War, and he resigned that position in protest of the war and said, if we must kill, we must honestly suffer the agony ourselves. So trying to help our veterans get to old pain that they felt and have never confessed is also really important. And during my father's terminal process last year, he didn't talk about his military service for most of his life, but only in the last few years did he finally open up. And at the end, his stories, his leftover stories, even silly little stories, like I bought my first pipe when I was stationed at Fort Knox. You want to return it to the Fort Knox Museum? Even touching and tender and cute stories that we'd never heard came out in the last couple of years of his life as he was facing his end and wanted to pass on everything. So I urge you to look at those, welcome the memories that are surfacing, make them as conscious as possible, and see if there's work that has to be done to make meaning and achieve resolution for these issues. So we can conceive of our time together in hospice and our time helping our veterans pass and supporting their loved ones as the final mission. Warriors need missions. And for those of us who work with our warrior veterans and warriors, welcome to all of you. Bless you all who are part of our community today. Those who are warriors, those who work with warriors, know that warriors need missions, and the more we can frame our life's work as mission, the better they'll do. The structure, the discipline, the purpose, the mission, the values of warriorhood hold the warriors together and give them shape when they're in the military. Some of the reason so many of our vets have trouble outside the military is because that structure is not there anymore. They do well with that structure, but not well with a civilian structure. So we can look at the military structure and what it provides and bring some of that back to them to help them live well and to help them die well is also. So think about that and think about how military conscious does your veteran want this experience to be, and how much can we do? Who can we bring in, and how can we structure the days, and how can we even talk about this process we're in as a mission together? And again, warriors traditionally die in community, involve as much of the community as possible. We have many veterans right here on this call who are helping other veterans pass. Bring in other vets, bring in family and community and friends and everybody that you can. One thing I've been able to do occasionally is couple our warriors who are in the terminal process with people who came from the countries they fought in. So I helped an Italian-American combat veteran who was in the invasion of Italy during World War II and felt guilty about it his whole life. But we found an Italian woman hospice volunteer who was a child during that invasion who really wanted to help this gentleman and thank him and tell him how important it was what he did for Italy by invading Italy and freeing it from fascism. So this was a beautiful reconciliation for both of them that was almost miraculous in finding them. I've also brought, and I'll tell some of these stories in a few minutes, I've brought Vietnamese people to meetings with American Vietnam veterans who are passing to have reconciliation, again, during that final time together. Okay, so thinking of all of this, and again, not just how do we help veterans deal with the dying process, but how deeply imprinted by the military and war experiences are they, and what special issues in facing the end do they have? This is a summary, and I hope we can, and trust, we will be able to make these slides available for you afterwards because we don't have the time in this short webinar to go through all of this, but it's all important. So just quickly, I'm supposed to take it as a warrior, but what about all of this pain and loss? Can I let down a lifetime of defenses? My father didn't say he was letting down his defenses, but he did let them down. And his heart broke through in ways that I'd never seen it all during my lifetime. And so though it was painful, my father had a good death. And as a warrior, we helped him let go of that experience with honor as well. I have never spoken of the war. Can I now? We really need to let them know how important it is that they do speak of the war. And of course, honor them if they don't want to, but our needs are here also. This is the last time we're going to be together, and we want to record as much of their life history and pass on as possible. Whether I was good and just or not is critical. If you remember the movie Saving Private Ryan, Ryan as an old man, when he visited the cemetery on Normandy Beach of the people who saved him, broke down and asked his family, I was a good man, wasn't I? That is about deserving to live. Was I a good soldier? Was I a good man? Do I deserve all of this that you're giving me? This profound grief that everyone carries from having been in war. The destruction surrounding them was much bigger than any one individual's goodness. And we shrink in relation to that. And we need to know that we're good people who have done right. So help people with that. We need to distinguish between PTSD and war imagery, which often intensifies during the end process. Am I at war again? We need to be able to go through that war imagery with our people. And sometimes it's going to be like a flashback. So you need to walk through it in a very sensitive way. Sometimes it's going to be dementia or dementia and a flashback together. And you're going to need to differentiate whether this can be therapeutic to go through it, or my veteran is in too much distress and they're not conscious and this is only dementia and I want to bring them back. One of the hardest choices we need to make during the terminal process, but we have to. War always impacts others' relationships. You heard the World War II veterans say, I had to struggle every day of my life just to be here. So how have the family relations been impacted by military service and veteran status? And what do family members need to say about it? And do we need to atone or make amends or understand each other better now that while we still have the opportunity? And as we said, they've been waiting to meet Mr. Death, and Death is an old friend, or an old acquaintance anyway. So how can I meet him? Will I see the others who died? Will I see my old battle buddies? Will I see my enemies, my former foes? We need to talk about that. Can I, as my father did, if I must die, then I must die. Can I greet death as a warrior and accept that this is the inevitable end of life that my warriorhood was teaching me about earlier on? Next question, did my service mean anything? Did it do any good? This is critical. So many veterans or family members question whether the service was worth it, especially if the service directly contributed to taking their lives. So if a family is against the war in Vietnam and their loved one died of Agent Orange, they may say, diseases, they may say, it wasn't worth it, it was a waste, and the war took away his life and it killed him as well. And I'll talk about making meaning of that also, but we have to hear that. We have to make the service mean something. Many of us have heard our veterans said in Vietnam, and sadly in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're also saying it don't mean nothing. If any veteran or family feels that way, we have to embrace that and help it mean something at the end. If it didn't mean anything before, we can indeed do work, service work at the end or memorial service afterwards to make it mean something. And then, of course, our beliefs in God and the divine. Did I become an atheist because of what happened? Or if not, I've retained my spiritual beliefs, how am I going to be judged afterwards? Talking about that, even imagining being before the heavenly tribunal is all really important. And we do have people writing in correctly saying, be really careful and give the veterans space when they need it. And also gently walk in and let them know you're interested and want to talk when they're willing to is very important. And certainly at the end process. Telling the story about the World War II air war veteran, He didn't want to talk to any hospice until they realized he was a veteran and that he had symbolic ways of trying to tell them. When I realized it and the other hospice staff joined him, apologized for not realizing, and kind of made fun of themselves and made it a joke, he then willingly and excitedly began talking and pouring out his stories to them. So be careful about the balance between space and intrusion. Go in respectfully and carefully, listen carefully whether or not they want us there, and move them slowly and gently forward into sharing more if they're able to. So I want to also spend a few minutes on the special issues regarding controversial wars. One of our vets rightly says, we're always training for war, always training for war, always ready to have to go into the kill or be killed situation. And so many veterans in the terminal phase just feel like, oh, it's finally here. Now it's my turn to face what I was trained for years or even decades ago. Okay, a few issues of special issues for the veterans of our controversial wars. As we said earlier, our modern weaponry may have caused death, damage and destruction or illness before that only catches people later. One Vietnam veteran family I worked with, whose son died of a heart attack from heart disease from the Vietnam War, said at his funeral, he was killed in the Vietnam War, just took a few decades for the war to catch up to him. And we had to work with the family doing meaningful service and memorial with other family members so that they could feel like their son's early death was not a waste. And we have the same questions with moral or immoral wars. And if a veteran is judging his service as wrong or immoral, he might not judge himself as a warrior, but rather as someone who committed murder. And we need to work with that carefully. We need to hear that if that's the case. Of course, especially all of us, but especially our chaplains might be most helpful there if somebody feels like they murdered because what they had to do was wrong or unnecessary or misguided, whatever it might be. And then there's all the veterans who feel like our country doesn't even know. How many people remember that we had troops in El Salvador or Panama or any of the other small countries we've fought in during our lifetimes? So we have to work with that. We have to help our veterans feel that they do take their place in history. So taking the veterans' opinion of where did you serve and why did you serve there and what do you think its importance to American and to world history is, if they're conscious enough to talk that way, is really important. If not, their families can still talk that way and share that and reflect on that. And as I said, you could find refugees from those countries who might want to visit with the veteran, who might even be hospice volunteers, to help reconcile how we had to serve with what it accomplished afterwards. And the final question, we have to feel it was worth the sacrifice. So do everything you can to examine what the veteran and family sacrificed and make it mean something for the present and future. Okay, so with all that said, this slide shows you a list of spiritual redemption for veterans. These are some practices that I use, that some of our hospice colleagues around the country use, but these are all taken from warrior traditions and warrior cultures around the world. We do some of them, we don't do many of them, we can do all of them, and we can do them all in meaningful contemporary ways. So going through a few of them, honoring the fallen. Traditional cultures always have rituals and build altars for the fallen warriors. You can practice rituals at the bedside and during the dying process and afterwards. We have some rituals, but there are warrior-specific rituals. And I do recommend my 2 books, War in the Soul and Warrior's Return, because I explore these in great detail with many specific examples that you could easily, naturally adopt to our work in hospice. Traditional cultures also always built altars for the dead, and many warriors keep altars when they're alive for their own fallen. So do they have an altar for others who have passed? Explore that, and if they do, great, you can build on that altar. If they don't, keep going and keep growing it. And you can also let the veteran know that if the family is willing, I do this and I urge families to do it, our family will build an altar for him or her, for you, after you pass. And we will keep the altar with your picture on it. We'll light candles or burn incense. We'll keep some of your military paraphernalia on it. Whatever is important. Different cultures have different rituals for doing this. But it's a very good ritual that brings peace to the veteran while he's alive and to the survivors afterwards. We have to honor and grieve all losses. We need to ask our veterans, women and men veterans, and I want to remind all of us that women are surviving, yes, thank God they're surviving. Women are serving in high numbers now. 15% of our military are women, and many of them are in combat situations. So we will be seeing more and more women veterans in hospice and in all of our veteran work from now on as our society continues to change in this way. So I apologize for using the male pronoun too often, saying he or him, but I'm talking about all of our warriors, and certainly honoring and recognizing all of our women warriors and the additional and special issues that women may carry from service as well. Reconciliation. At the end, veterans meeting with other veterans, meeting with former foes when possible, meeting with civilians, sharing stories, meeting with politicians to talk about the service and to receive overdue rewards, all can help greatly as well. Now, and we mentioned the importance of therapeutic responses, not only during counseling, but during the terminal practice. If you can, there may be flashbacks, there may be nightmares, there will be memories, there may be intrusive memories. PTSD symptoms may get worse. So as much as you can respond therapeutically and take the person through a healing process is great. Where you evaluate that you can't, bringing them back into the present moment is also really important. And sharing to the degree that the veteran or the family can handle it, explaining the degree to which military service and combat service and the death print all have become part of the veteran, and they are here now at the end, and we all have to deal with this together in as open-hearted and therapeutic a manner as possible is really important. It is possible sometimes to achieve, as you all know, working in hospice, miraculous healing and achieving of inner peace at the very end. Whoops. Did it again. Jumped again. Okay. Philanthropy. One really wonderful way to make meaning is to leave some good behind. I worked with a Vietnam veteran who wanted to go back to Vietnam to make amends. He couldn't because he was terminally ill. He left my organization, Soldier's Heart, $5,000 to do philanthropic work in Vietnam for him in his memory. And we actually built a home for a disabled Vietnamese veteran and his family who were destitute. In this veteran's name, his family knows about it. His family helped raise the money. We have a memorial plaque there for him. And he, knowing that was happening, and the family ever since have been in much deeper peace, because though dying from Agent Orange cancer didn't have meaning, leaving help for disabled and destitute Vietnamese veterans had extraordinary meaning for him, and he died in peace. So leaving philanthropy, leaving a legacy that includes telling your stories, finding ways with chaplains and with the military and veteran community to sanctify this service, taking oral history, gathering the relics, perhaps making donations to museums, to local faith organizations, passing them down through the family are all critical. And the veteran involved in, as well as the family, in planning the memorial service and a funeral and dealing with how they want to be remembered is really important. So this is an example of completing tasks of grief and honor. You hear the quote from a Lakota elder: when you kill an enemy warrior, you become responsible for his soul. Some warriors felt that during service, many of them feel it afterwards. What you see is a picture of a man named Will, who's a Native American warrior who I took back to Vietnam, and we're actually on the very site where he killed his first enemy soldier, but this was 45 years afterwards. Will had been terribly tortured because he was taught this lesson: I was responsible for the soul of the warriors whose lives I took. He was not able to do a ceremony and complete the grieving process during the war. His officer called him names and ordered him back into the line. We went back to Vietnam, and on that kill site, he did his traditional ceremony for the enemy warrior's soul. And he went from angry and frowning all the time to a very peaceful and happy man who actually went back to his tribe as a model citizen, and then taught this lesson to others. Yes, you may have to kill, but always feel grief, always feel guilt, always not guilt, always feel grief, always keep your heart open and alive, and reconcile with that person's soul and pray for it, even if you've had to release it to the other side. Really, really important death and dying wisdom from our traditional warriors. These two warriors have both passed since. Our American veteran, Bill, was dying of heart disease and desperately wanted to go back to Vietnam to reconcile with the Vietnamese people before he passed. So this picture was taken just a few months before he passed. You see Bill with a Viet Cong elder, a man who was at war for 25 years against 3 different invaders. He was Nguyen Tam Ho. Both of these men have passed since this picture was taken 2 years ago. But you see how much peace and joy is in their faces. They both, Mr. Tiger said, we are brothers who survived the same hell, and we will be brothers forever. And so entering into this universal brotherhood of warriors after the experience and at the end of life is very possible. And as you see, experiencing joy in the old meeting rather than grief, pain, shock, fear, dismay, despair. That can all be transformed through such meetings. And as we said earlier about living memorials, you see an American pair on your left, or the blonde-haired woman and the tall man. They are the brother and sister of the man whose picture is on the right. You see John Priest between the incense and the candles. This young man was killed in Vietnam. It ravaged the family. The father died of a heart attack. The family broke up until the brother went back to Vietnam with me, and we found the site his brother died on, and we did ritual and ceremony there. And then on the left, you see us dedicating an infirmary that family, my organization, and old comrades from the military all chipped in together. So we built an infirmary for an orphanage. And the picture on your right is an altar that was set up in a Vietnamese infirmary for the young American soldier that was killed nearby. And the infirmary exists in his memory and honor. So the American family healed and came together. The surviving battle buddies from the Vietnam War came together. And the Vietnamese man you see in between Steve, the tall man, and me, that's me on the far right, he was a Viet Cong veteran. And he's there celebrating with us, and he adopted the fallen American as his brother and is doing Buddhist ceremony with him for the rest of his life. So this family has become happy and at peace, and it's brought together old battle buddies, the family and surviving veterans who knew his brother, and Vietnamese and Americans all came together as a healing practice over this memorial. And the infirmary has, the orphanage has an infirmary for its children. And one of the travelers who was with us just sent in the comment, and this is true. Part of the problem with the family was they had never, this is Susan Raby Dunn from Canada, and she was with us on this trip. Thank you, Susan, bless you. Susan reminded me that the family had never spoken about the brother's death. From his death, all those decades until we went back, and Stephen was the only one trying to remember his family. So, his brother, until we did all this action for them. So what this teaches us, again, is how critically important it is to tell our stories and get our families talking. And you can use that with your veterans as well during the terminal process, that we really need to know your stories so we can pass them on, so we can make amends, so we can leave memorials, and so they're not underground and they don't become secrets in the family that might come back as dreams or nightmares or haunt any of us. So let's clean up the past together and leave good behind as a result of it. And these are some more practices in Vietnam that we can use. On your right, you see a man named Tran Dinh Song, who is our guide in Vietnam. He was in the Southern Air Force, and he is lighting incense in front of an altar. Every Vietnamese family, no matter how poor or simple, has an altar in their main room, even if they only live in a hut or under a tarp in the jungle. Some are that poor, yet they have an altar for those in their family line who have passed in the last 100 years. And I have my vets build altars, or my families build altars. Let the veteran help building the altar. Build the altar while they're still here, in case there's grieving and farewells they still need to take. And let them know the altar will remain afterwards, and you can go there and talk to them, meet their soul, and talk spiritually at the altar. In fact, this is a practice you can use to help end nightmares. Some veterans will tell the figures coming to them in their nightmares, don't come to me in my sleep anymore. I'm building you an altar and I'll talk to you there when I'm awake. And when veterans do that and practice that regularly, it really can and sometimes does completely clear up the nightmares, because we're making what bothers our unconscious conscious and dealing with it consciously. So I heartily recommend that practice. Now, I also have windy tombs there. On the left, your left, you see a windy tomb in Vietnam. When there are MIAs, people who are missing for a long time and assumed dead somewhere else, either in war or a boating accident or at sea, the Vietnamese, when they accept that they're dead, will build empty tombs. So the soul still has a place to return and be at home. And so the family has a place to remember and worship. And so I have had some of our veterans build windy tombs. One of our veterans from Canada, Beth Marie, hello, Beth Marie. I see she's on this call as well, and bless her. But Beth Marie goes back to Vietnam regularly now and has made it her second home. She built a windy tomb for a child in Vietnam that she loved very much and helped nurse while she was on service there during the war. And that she shared that experience with our group, and it helped us all appreciate the death imprint and help these souls heal and reconcile and have an ongoing relationship even after the physical body is gone. Someone also just asked, well, one comment comes in saying that we are dealing with the shadow soul, and I want to reinforce that, saying yes, we all have shadows, and there are shadow souls, and those who are in the terminal process report seeing them. Those with severe PTSD report seeing them, and when the shadow soul is there, we can still deal with it as a living spiritual entity and resolve some of the issues that we're carrying regarding that. These practices, by the way, I'm talking about Vietnamese Buddhist practices and Native American. Many of them are in the Bible as well. So, and again, if you read my books, War in the Soul and Warrior's Return, I use the Bible extensively. For example, we have 150 Psalms of David. Half of them are poems of PTSD. Some of them are about trying to meet his own death courageously. Some of them are confessions of moral injury. And in the Jewish tradition, the Psalms are read as a person passes, and the first night after they've died, the Psalms are read over the body. You can read the Psalms as a person is passing. I did that with my father. My father recited the 23rd Psalm over and over and over again when he couldn't say anything else. I didn't even know he knew it until I heard him reciting it as he was dying. And you can also have your veterans recite Psalms. Would you recite a Psalm to the divine now as you're leaving us? And I'll write it down and we'll save it and we'll recite it after you're gone. There are other practices in the Bible and that I go into in my books that also help us understand how to deal with death, and also warriors' special relationship to war trauma, to morality, and to facing death itself. So we can't go over all of these now, but I affirm how much our Judeo-Christian heritage offers us for this, and that you can find these issues, this guidance in our own religions of origin, as well as the traditional cultures I'm teaching from. Another dimension is traditional cultures again, and very much in the Bible, and people practice this. Last messages and last teachings to leave behind. I chose two from the American Civil War. The first quote, "Tell my father I did right." Sergeant Kirkland at the Battle of Fredericksburg went over, the only Confederate soldier who climbed the wall and wandered the battlefield tending the wounded and dying Union soldiers. And there is a statue of this great deed of moral courage on the Fredericksburg battlefield now. Kirkland was killed less than a year later, and his dying words were, "Tell my father I did right." We could use that as a model. What did you do right that you want us to remember? What do you want passed on from your military history to the rest of the family? How shall you be remembered? And it's true about the nation also. Our veterans are aching to tell their stories, to be counted as important contributors to our nation who lived an experience that none of us can possibly understand or be prepared well enough for until we're in it. So collect the last messages for the family and the last messages or teachings for the nation. Veterans sometimes want our help in writing their farewell letter to the nation, and they sometimes want that published. I've helped vets do that. And this can be really important. And I couldn't say this all my life, or I felt this all my life. Nobody listened. Maybe they'll listen now. I have to leave this as a farewell message. Also, we do have public memorials and grieving places. This is also ancient. You're looking at the tomb of Marathon, the 300, where the Spartans fell and are buried right on the battlefield. Traditional cultures, it was a great honor for a warrior to be buried where he fell. We don't do that anymore, but we have places like the Vietnam Wall in Washington. We have memorials all over the country, and getting our vets to memorials, if they still want to go, or at the end of the process, is really important and can also bring peace. And as I said, my father made this declaration: if I die, then I must die. It was like a death song. In some cultures, and we see this is Sitting Bull's death song, I am a man and wherever I lie is my own. He sang that as he was being murdered at the very end of his life. He had the death song ready. And traditional cultures invite people to write last poems or last songs that they want to be their last words as they leave, or they want us to recite or sing for them afterwards. And so you might do that. Sit with your veteran, create this final death song, sing it with him, or give a promise that I will make sure your last words or your last song is remembered. Our family will remember it and learn it and carry it on. I did create a death song for my father with those words and others, and my family's learning it. So my father's death song will be remembered, and the courage he had in the way he lived will be remembered. We can do that for all of our veterans. I want to leave some time for your questions and comments. So very quickly, we've covered all of these, but ancestor reverence, initiation as an ancestor, building altars and graves and monuments, practicing atonement, getting clear of and working on the legacy we're going to leave behind, affirming your place in history, reconciling, making peace with the dead of all sides, understanding and talking about how we will be remembered, leaving our final messages, and being told and remembered that as an ancestor are all possible, all critical, all helpful. Yes, and one of our listeners also just reminded us that there's, in Judaism, there's a practice called leaving an ethical will. And you could do that too. You can use that as a dying practice. What do you want us to do that we are duty bound to do? And we will sign off that we will do this for you after you leave. So if you still have grief or moral injury, and we create an ethical will, you can die in peace knowing that we will fulfill your last wishes, and your soul will be well, and you will have achieved healing from the moral injury after you're gone and through the rest of us. So all good, all great lessons that work well. And my slides are jumping again, but this last slide shows you two of our warriors. This is the grave of the Spartans at Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans that resisted and died during the Persian invasion there. And I bring our warriors both to Vietnam and to Greece once a year usually. These warriors are older and they wanted to return, and they wanted to honor the warrior spirit of the ages, and they wanted to join their American warrior legacy to this ancient legacy, or this universal legacy of the warrior spirit throughout time. And so there they are, joining, honoring their fallen comrades, joining their story to theirs, and making it the story of one warrior all around the world. Okay, so, oops. That's the last slide we can have, and my slides just disappeared. Can you put on the last slide, Catherine?
Yes, I am right now.
And we can
I'm gonna.
Thank you. So I'm not even going to try to find mine, but I'm going to listen and let's talk. So
All
friends out
righty.
there, we have time for questions, comments, discussion. I can take some of the questions that have come in until somebody speaks.
Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can jump around. Do women veterans view death the same as male veterans? That's an important question. And sometimes, yes, but sometimes it's even harder for women and traditional cultures discouraged women from becoming warriors, where our culture now is going in the opposite direction, to restore women's equality and rights, and that's important. However, traditional cultures said women are the life givers, the life makers. We can't ask them to be the life takers as well. And so they tended to protect them from the combat warrior role, not universally, but commonly. And in my work with women combat veterans from our wars today, many of them really do have a harder time with death, with taking life, with seeing life. They feel it more deeply, and it can be more painful and more crushing to them. So do be aware of that. What does completing the grieving process look like? That's a wonderful question, and probably none of us ever completely complete it. But what it looks like in general is getting to a place of genuine acceptance where, well, the veteran who was dying of cancer, whose picture I showed, he couldn't go to Vietnam. We brought Vietnamese here. He told his story to the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese woman was a young teenager during the war, and she told, in response, her heart opened. She remembered a story of a friendship she had with an American GI whom she never was able to thank. And so she gave her story to our dying veteran. They exchanged stories, they hugged and they kissed, and the family left us money, and he did leave an ethical will to tell us what to do with it. We built a school or the house in his name. And so I would say he completed the grieving process, because the last time I saw him, my eyes were filled with tears. And I said, Stan, I'm so sorry that this is your end. And he hugged me with a huge smile and a kiss. And he said, it's all right, Ed, it's all right. I'm at peace. We've completed my life and my dying process, and I'm not in grief anymore. So we can all let me go now. So completing the grieving process would mean profound acceptance and a deep, deep yes and a joy in life, in everything it's given us, even in these horrors. Okay, does anybody want to talk, or shall I keep going?
Oh, hey, Dr. Tick, and I just wanted to let everyone know. Let's see, if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you. I know we had a couple of questions come in, so I was just going to read one off, and then when Dr. Tick is answering, I'll go ahead and look through the other hands that are raised. So I'm in the Q&A right now. We have a question from Vanessa Salinas, who's calling in from Alaska. Hi, Vanessa. She said, we've noticed the impact on spouses and families, including younger brothers and sisters, that comes up for veterans in our care, especially those veterans from Vietnam and secret wars. Do you have any recommendations for addressing the impact on these families?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Thank you for asking that. We absolutely, all of us, are responsible to realize and affirm that secondary trauma is a real experience. Transgenerational trauma is a real experience. And if I woke up because my father was screaming from war nightmares for years of my childhood, then I'm also going to have troubled sleep and a challenged developmental cycle. And I'm going to be shaped by that experience as well. So unquestionably, secondary and transgenerational trauma need to be addressed. And some of the practices we have shared can help that. Building the altar, recognizing everybody's impacted, receiving the stories from your loved one, having a discussion if the veteran can, having family counseling sessions at the end, discussing what it was like to grow up together. And does father or mother veteran and children of vets need to say anything or reconcile anything at the end of life while they still can? Lots of family members have said to me after working together or after reading my books, have said to me, I always thought, it's usually the older veterans, usually World War II generation fathers, but they said, I always thought my father was either mentally ill or a son of a bitch until I learned what veterans carry and what the combat experience was like and what it does to them. And only then was I able to understand and forgive my parent. If we can do that while they're still here, of course, it's much, much better. But of course, families should recognize their transgenerational and secondary traumas, that they're also deeply impacted by it, and that they need healing practices as well. In my next trip to Vietnam coming up this November, I have 3 war widows going, who all of their marriages were impacted and destroyed by their husband or former husband's service in the war. They're going back to reconcile with their own history and also with the Vietnamese people. So yes, attend to it. Yes, do family counseling. Yes, do these practices for the families, even if it's after the vet has passed.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Tick. So we actually have a few questions from folks regarding workers who have never themselves served in the military. Could you provide some insight for clinicians into assisting veterans for those who are not brothers in arms?
I would love to. Thank you all for that question. And the reason I especially love this question is because most people, when they hear my work, assume that I was in the military and I'm a veteran. And guess what? I'm not. So I can answer from my own experience. This is what I have to say. All of us have inner warriors. The warrior is an archetype. Every society gives particular shape to it and recognizes its military service people as warriors, not all of us. But psychologically and spiritually, all of us have an inner warrior. We can achieve deep reconciliation with our veterans by working to earn our place in the brotherhood and sisterhood. By now, I'm mistaken for a veteran, and I am included in the brotherhood of veterans, and I'm very deeply honored that sometimes I've been called up for ceremonies and pinned along with the other vets for my service. That completed my rite of passage and initiation and service as an American. And I invite you to use this as a role model for yourself. The best thing you can do is say, I'm not a vet, but I want to learn everything I can. Educate yourself to the lives of warriors, not just to our psychology and our hospice practices, which are important, but learn as much as you can about warfare, warriorhood, military service, and be there with an open heart and let yourself be impacted and earn your brotherhood and sisterhood. It will bring you to a profound initiation that is life-changing in the most beautiful and meaningful ways.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay, so I see online, Richard Davis, you raised your hand, so I'm going to unmute your microphone right now if you'd like to speak. Are you with us, Richard?
Richard may be gone.
I'm not seeing him yet. Okay, well, moving on. Let's see, we have Nancy. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, I was privileged to work on an inpatient hospice unit at the Coatesville Veterans Hospital for 12 and a half years. And everything you said today was exactly right. They do want to talk. They don't always want to talk with everybody around. They want to tell their stories. I appreciate everything you had to say. And I really feel that, like you said, the Vietnam War veterans have a real difficult time right now, and their families, because they were alienated by their families because they came home with a lot of baggage. So dealing with the family issues is equally as important as the veterans' death.
Absolutely, Nancy, and thank you for that. And I would argue, building on what you said, that sometimes dealing with the family and community and nations issues are even more important, because veterans tell us, when I went to war, I knew it was going to be horrible and people were going to be trying to kill each other, but I didn't know and didn't expect that I would be neglected, betrayed, abused, abandoned when I got home. And so veterans will say the homecoming trauma is worse than the combat trauma. And that's something we really can impact during our time together in hospice. Really, as hospice workers together, we are representing the nation that finally is giving them the attention and the care and the honor that they should have gotten all along.
Exactly. It was my privilege, and I go to the va.gov site, and under the health issues, I have researched all of them. And if they haven't found out all the issues that happen, that's a really good place to start for learning about what our veterans have gone through.
Yes. Yes. Everybody go there, please.
Oh, well, thank you, Ed. I know we're right at the end, but if you have a few more minutes, I know we got started a few minutes late. Do you mind answering another few questions?
No, I'm happy to, and just apologize to everybody for some of the funky behavior we had with our technology. So I know
yes, it
robbed us of a few
happened.
minutes, and let's stay together and still deal with some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I see Al Schneider raised his hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute your phone. Are you there, Al? Nope, I think we lost him. Okay, well, again, if anyone has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I know a lot of people have been asking if this will be available after the fact, and the answer is yes, absolutely. We're recording this, so we will be posting the entire webinar along with Dr. Tick's slides, a copy of the PowerPoint, on the We Honor Veterans website. Under that educational resources page, there's a section on webinars. It'll be posted there within the next few days. And again, to any of our We Honor Veterans partners that are on the call right now, this absolutely counts as one of your staff in services. Again, we're glad that everyone could join us, and if you're viewing it now or even after the fact, this absolutely counts towards your activity requirements. Okay, so I see a question from Leonard Blank. I'm unmuting your phone right now. Can you hear us, Leonard? Okay, I guess not.
I can take some of the questions that are still lingering from the chat room, unless somebody wants to.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, please keep trying to get people on, but I can read a few of the others. There is a question about working with families of soldiers who have committed suicide and how much pain and shame that they're carrying. And do we have advice on that? Well, yes, that's really critical issue, of course, and especially today with so many suicides. And yes, I have worked with such families. We need to remember that the experience of shame is the shadow side of honor and dignity. when people who have been dishonored, who have not been given what they deserve, who have been blamed, who have been made to collapse into a wound that really belongs to all of us and the whole nation, there's profound shame. And tragically, the shame is attached to the suicide, but it shouldn't be. The shame is the pain and the shame that the warrior has been carrying, that he couldn't stand anymore. So it's very important to help the family in their grieving process, of course, but to share with them, to transform the shame into honor and dignity, to tell as much of the story as possible, to honor people who were carrying so much pain that they didn't want to live with the pain anymore. And also, as we said, to do something afterwards that is meaningful, that will turn that terrible, tragic loss through suicide into something important. The way the school kids in Florida are saying, no more, we have to do something. We're going to speak out to the politicians and make this mean something. Families of suicide veterans, it doesn't have to be big like that, but it sure has to be restoring honor and dignity to the family and the family history, and not blaming the soldier because he or she had to leave us. Okay, do we have anybody online?
All right, yeah, we have one more. Let's see, I'm going to try this one more time. Jim Sauer, I'm unmuting you right now. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, there you are.
Oh,
Did you have a question?
my computer's going crazy here.
Yeah, it sounds like we're having a lot of feedback from him, but I know, again, we're right at the end. Dr. Tick, did you have any final thoughts or anything else you wanted to wrap up before we close out?
Well, there's about a dozen more questions I'd like to answer that we don't have time for, but let me just quickly signal to people. Somebody asked, is there different dealing with different services? The answer is yes, and you should be aware of each of the unique dimensions of the different services. Is there a difference dealing with higher ranking officers? The answer is yes, for sure. Command is lonely, and officers usually have a harder time telling their stories because they learned they weren't supposed to. So they need additional support. The question about using mediumship during a veteran's dying process is coming in. And there too, I have used mediums, and a very talented medium traveled to Vietnam with me once. And as an adjunct to the therapy, whether or not people believe they're actually talking to the soul on the other side doesn't matter. Whether it's coming from your unconscious or coming from the spirit world, you can still have dialogues with the fallen and the deceased after they're gone. And you can consider possibly using a medium as a significant therapeutic tool for resolving the end. There's also a question about non-combat veterans and whether this works for them. The answer is yes, because they've all been trained to kill. Every veteran has the killing arts. Hopefully they haven't had to use them. Many haven't, but they still have learned how, and they need this. But non-combat veterans also may need to resolve the issue about somebody wrote in, how do you handle guilt for having served in the US military but not in Vietnam? Well, explore that really carefully. Maybe you're lucky not to serve in Vietnam, or maybe you have to resolve your issues with Vietnam veterans. I have worked with veterans bringing combat and non-combat veterans together to reconcile with each other for the particular service they had to give. Vietnam combat veterans will often tell our non-combat vets, good that you weren't there. You're lucky you weren't there. It saved you from my fate. Do something for us now. But I honor you for not being in Vietnam. That's helped me. Veterans have thanked me for not being in Vietnam so that I could learn and do this work and give my life to them in this form of service. So yes, we can reconcile our non-service or our peacetime service by giving other forms of healing service afterwards. So I'm running through the questions, but I think that's about it. I'm breathless. You're all wonderful. The last thing I would say is we are all engaged in sacred service. Our warriors deserve, and their families deserve, everything we can give them. Our women warriors deserve as much and even more attention than our men, because they may be more challenged from the service. And all of us can join the brotherhood and sisterhood. And by doing this, we really are helping our nation heal, because together we're healing this terrible old alienation between the warriors and the civilians. We're in the middle, bringing them all together for family healing, individual healing, and national healing. So thank you and bless you all.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Tick, and thank you to everyone who was able to join us today as well for your service to our dear veterans and for all that you do. Again, this will be up on the We Honor Veterans website if you'd like to listen again, or you have any colleagues that may have missed it. I know it will be extremely informative for anyone who works with or cares for veterans. And as Dr. Tick said, his contact information is up. More information on Soldier's Heart as well. And again, this will be up on the We Honor Veterans website, so you can listen to it again for free on demand anytime you'd like. Again, thank you all for joining us, and a blessed day to everyone.